Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 1619, the Lingering Imprint. Today we have a special guest coming in from Houston, Texas. Our friend Linda Pope, who's a frequent visitor to the group, has been reading Cast, and she's going to share some of her impressions of Cast and reflections and have a conversation about the book. And some people, I think probably most of the people here have read it, but if you have a question or a comment, just let us know whether you've read the book or seen the movie, and then take it from there. So with that, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Linda. So Linda Pope, it's all yours. Take it away.
Hi, everybody, and thank you. Thank you, Dick, for this opportunity. I think this grew out of a late night conversation Dick and I had after I had only read 58 pages of the book. It was that intense. If you have read the book, enter book in the chat. If you've seen the movie, enter movie in the chat. If you have read the book and seen the movie, enter both in the chat. So we'll have some context of where we are. Very good. Excellent, excellent. Awesome. Yeah, and I've done both as well. Okay, let's jump on in. Let's engage in a conversation, hopefully extending our interest and understanding beyond slavery and racism in America. It's my belief that sharing perspectives and extending value to others helps in maintaining our humanity. My perspective has been shaped by my experiences in America and once in Germany. The struggle has been for me to learn why, and yet embrace folk who don't know me and therefore don't like me. In 1954, Dad packed up the family and drove our home from Black professional neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, to Houston, Texas. My mom, my brother, and I spent the summer there while he played baseball for the Houston Bucks. It would be my first very bitter taste of segregation and racism, and I hated the experiences of that summer. I asked my dad, why do these white people hate me? He shared a parable similar to a book, The Elephant Rope, an African storybook I recently found. It goes like this. A man was walking through a camp and noticed that the gigantic elephants weren't being caged or kept in chains. All that was holding them back from escaping the camp was a small rope tied to one of their legs. As he watched these massive animals, he was amazed that they did not try to break free and escape the camp. He wondered why. A trainer explained, when they were very young and much smaller, we used the same rope to tie them. At that age, it's enough to hold them, and they are conditioned to believe that they cannot break free. They believe the rope can still hold them now, so they never try to break free. Over time, they believed it just wasn't possible. It is what they learned. Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, published in 2020 and made popular by the movie Origins, has received accolades from former presidents, US presidents, bookstores, periodicals, news outlets from California to Mumbai and beyond. It is no coincidence that we needed to be reframed as the 1619 Project Lingering Impact. Because slavery is foundational to her work, this book helps expand our sphere of interest into the 21st century. It might even broaden our reach to our children and grandchildren. It's not a book, I'm not a book critic or a literary reviewer, yet I can't stop recommending this book to people that I encounter all the time. I actually have a photograph of the book on my phone, and I gladly share it with them. I think we're interested in answering some questions that have caused the current divisive sociopolitical climate in America. Of Question 1, where are we? Question 2, how do we get here? Question 3, why are we here? Question 4, what can we do about it? What I learned answered a lifetime of questions about the country in which I live. This book shook me. It rocked my world. In the words of former President Bill Clinton, quote, it literally changed the way I thought about the world and deepened my understanding of it. Ken Burns would go on to say, caste is rearranging my molecules right now. And the LA Times would comment, Isabel Wilkerson's studies surpasses many books on institutional racism by reframing the problem as something more vast and more concrete than that. We suffer under a caste system with a dominant, shrinking group fighting for continued supremacy and the lower caste fighting still for full human rights. Caste, defined simply as a system of dividing people in a society into different social classes, is the framework for the studs and joists of the house-built America, whose roof has leaked and has been repatched, whose walls wallpapered over expansive cracks in the sheetrock. Caste places us where we are, living in an old house we inherited. And the parable of the elephant rope may inform why we are here. Shared conversation about this work just might suggest what we can do. I'll open by asking a few questions. Did you have any personal reactions to the book? Are there any discoveries or revelations about yourself or others from the book? What were they? How has this work reshaped or expanded your thinking? How can you contribute to collective healing? Let's have a conversation.
Well, I'll just pitch in. My overall reaction to this thing was people refer to it how profound the impact was, and I agree with that, because the impact on me was that I realized how deeply embedded this caste system was in my structuring of the world and how I imagined the world. And it made me think that everything in my mind of how I shape the world and react to it is influenced by this caste system, which I had no knowledge of at all. And it makes me rethink. It makes me feel like I need to rethink things from the ground up anytime I encounter some new thought or idea, that my reaction to it is going to be shaped by influences that I'm not really fully aware of. And so I found it unsettling, to say the least, like a big earthquake. So that's my personal reaction to the book. Thank you, Tabby.
The earthquake rattled the house a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you read the book?
Yes. And saw the movie.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
The movie, I found a very different experience. The movie was really not about the book. The book was the background to the movie. But, having read the book, the movie made a lot of sense. And I was particularly struck by some of the conversations in Germany and by the images of people burning books and thinking about how that's basically happening in this country today. And it's really kind of frightening.
Right. And her parallel to how Hitler came to power.
Yes.
By studying the caste system and how America's enslaved Black people. That was earth-shaking as well.
Well, for me, I had been taking a number of courses kind of as a guinea pig for a professor at UCLA who was trying to develop a master's program in Holocaust studies. And so what I thought of was the race laws that were written in Germany and how much they based what they came up with on the United States, our racial and misogynistic laws, as well as concepts that sort of emerged out of a commercial sense of people. I then went on to take a couple of courses with Dr. Richard Bell from the University of Maryland. And he is very interesting because he is from England, and his whole knowledge of American studies has a frame of colony around it, which is not our narrative in this country. We have this notionality that everyone who came here by their consent, by their will, to pull themselves up. And it isn't true. It's not true. From the very beginning, the United States was a commercial enterprise. And so this book I was reading at a time when all of this was getting mixed together, and I haven't kind of straightened it all out yet, but it added to the mix. And then, of course, me being who I am, there's that intersectionality with gender violence. And that was where I went with
Will, you look like you're about to explode. What do you want to say?
it.
No. Well, I have a somewhat different take on the book. And because I basically accepted what I think is its basic premise, which is that racism is inherent to the whole structure of the society from the beginning. And like the Indian caste system and the Nazi anti-inferior people, is based on some ways of thinking where family is important. Now, I was raised in the South, and I was under Jim Crow. If that was the way it was. The part that was not Jim Crow was the concept of family. See, I was a Fuller, and the Fullers do this, and the Fullers don't do that, and you're a good person because you're a Fuller, and you're not as good as the people across the street from a different family, and a whole hierarchy based on inheritance. And it was not even, I mean, we didn't even talk race. We would be punished if we used the N word. We would have all kinds of stuff because that was what it was. But the concept of who you are genetically being fundamental to how you are perceived and your potential and so on was very much in it, as in the other systems. The moving away from that, the recognition of the absurdity of race, has founded, for me, this is, what are we doing here? This is ridiculous. But we recognizing it is so inherent and so strong, it has to be dealt with at a very deep level to change the way we have our base model of how people are. And there's more than that. I have using the term Eurocentric a lot because Europeans are white. Europeans are mostly Christian or Jewish in Europe. There was the sense of Germany and England being the pinnacle of civilization, the right of Europeans, because our civilization was better, to go and conquer other areas to help bring the civilization to the savages and so on and so forth. There was a very, very, very strong, but the underlying emphasis that in book, I say, was not surprising to me because I already kind of thought this, was this is not just some kind of a built up prejudice from Jim Crow. This is how we see ourselves as a European American society. And
Yeah,
that's where I am.
she actually wrote something similar to that in the book. And
Uh-huh.
I'll quote, actually took notes. This was a struggle. Caste is more than rank. It is a state of mind that holds everyone captive. The dominant imprisoned in an illusion of their own entitlement, the subordinate trapped in the purgatory of someone else's definition of who they are and what they should be.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. That says it more eloquently than I was saying it. Yeah.
And she uncovered the origin of the word Caucasian.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember that. What was that?
there's a apparently there's a doctor who was studying skulls in Europe, and he was enamored with a particular skull that had had different features than the African skulls that he knew were from Africa, and he named it after the Caucasus Mountains.
Uh-huh. Well, it was Caucasus. Okay, yeah.
So race is a social construct. We are actually of our tribes of origin or our countries of origin. I did not know that when Irish immigrated to the United States through Ellis Island, they were considered less than the Negro. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
And I have a colleague who is Irish, and he banters back and forth with me about, Linda, I hear about what you've been through, but when I came here, I said, I know, but I caught hell first.
Yeah. I'll say you've been
The same
a
thing
lot
was
before.
attributed to the Italians. Both
Right.
the Irish and the Italians were considered.
Right. And we can think about that just thinking of when President Kennedy was running for office. You know, they started to distinguish him as Catholic, and
Yeah.
it's like, what?
The Pope will run
The
America.
Pope will run America.
America. You know, and so to me, this her book, Origins, it's an S. Where are the come froms? And what discontents do they lead to? And it's not just brown people, Black people. It is women, LGBTQ,
Yeah.
Native Americans, my goodness, and other immigrants. And for sure, those who've come here by another means. And the fear is what? What did she say in the book was the fear? The fear running through this whole thing. It's not so much hate as it is, she pointed out, a fear. What would be the fear of the, she calls it the dominant group. What's the fear?
Lose something.
I don't remember. I know our blood would be diluted was one phrase you would have in there. Miscegenation. No, I don't know.
It's that
No,
they
that they'll lose status.
lose power.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That.
Power. And we can see that in some of our news feeds, and it explains why Donald Trump is who he is and why he has the base he has. What could be some of the reasons based on her book?
Out there in a lot, certainly people who support him are throughout the
Right.
world now.
Right, in the world. Yeah.
But there is a group that is living in a part of the country where their standard of living has been diminished by a lack of economic opportunity, and they're fearful, and they're attributing perhaps their loss of status incorrectly.
Yeah, and
they're in areas of the country where there was heavy manufacturing, and that is either been taken over by machination or it's been exported outside the United States. And so those really, those jobs that got them off of subsistence farming, which is kind of where they were, and yielded a much better lifestyle for them, they see disappearing. And they're fearful.
Yeah, very fearful. And we would call, well, that group has been denoted as blue collar, middle class.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know from reports in the news, the middle class is, quote, shrinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a great, yes.
Insecure. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I saw something back when I was in graduate school, which was in 67, 68. It's just a long time ago. But I think it was the Harvard Business Review was doing a study of people's attitude toward risk. And what they were doing was they had a basic, simple way of figuring this out. They'd say flip a coin and say, how much would you bet on the flip of a coin? And they found that, just to summarize, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but they graphed all this out for different people. But they found that there was a greater fear of losing $10 than an attraction of winning 100.
Oh yeah.
And so the idea of losing something is much more threatening to people than the consideration of what they might gain. And flipping a coin is a 50-50 chance, so that's what they were comparing and saying, how
Yeah.
much would you bet on the flip of a coin? And they experimented with different numbers and asked people, and they discovered, that there's a real, that the risk of losing something is a greater influence on people's actions than the opportunity to gain something is.
Yep.
The balance is way out of proportion.
Right.
And so I found that interesting, and I think it applies to the current situation, because the people that Donald Trump appeals to are afraid of losing something that they feel like they've had.
Mhm.
And so now that you can go into how realistic any of that is, it's a totally different question, but that's what the fear is that he's playing on.
Well, fear is not rational all the time
Right.
either. So
Yes. Right.
this helped me understand when my friends would ask me, how in the world could this person who happened to be a Black celebrity support Donald Trump? And I said, well, you have to understand what they're afraid of losing, because that's more of a motivator.
Yes.
Fear and anger are greater motivators than joy and happiness. So, we're kind of in that place.
I put a link in the chat with Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, who has a whole chapter devoted to that. That book for me is the most incomprehensive explanation for these behaviors of anything that I've read, because it goes into that. It goes into the biases of why you do certain things you think would be against your economic interests and so on. But that, dwelling on that concept of fear, what are we afraid of losing? And
I'll rephrase it. Why don't we understand that the little rope holding one leg can be broken?
Yeah.
And it's the conditioning. I love the purity of little kids. They don't see color, they don't see size, they don't see shape. They don't care if you have one arm or if you have one leg. They just embrace you. And that should be the essence of the human spirit. But something happens and people become shaped by their surroundings, by the environment they grew up in. And
Yeah.
I don't know how, I don't know why, but my father wouldn't let us hold on to the hatred we experienced that year. And it was ugly. It was very ugly.
Yeah.
He wanted us to grow and respect and love people. So he taught us that more than anything. So which leads me to ask, what can we do about it? Well, what can we do?
I don't know. What can we do? If moving to that, first of all, before we get on to the idea of the hate, I want to build on that idea, because I don't know if people have seen the musical South Pacific. It's pretty old, back in the 50s. And it was American soldiers in World War II in a Pacific island. And there was a little song sung about the children. You have to be carefully taught to hate. And it's a charming little song. The whole thing is, for its day, an amazing essay on race relations. But there are things in the way people are raised which also do that. Think about little bitty baby comes out of the mommy's womb, and they're there, and they know themselves, and they know mommy. And then who's this other person over there? This big sort of person. Who is that? That's daddy. And you have to get used to daddy. And okay, now I'm used to daddy. And you got little brothers and sisters. Who are those? And you're sort of, wait, who are those? Watch out. I'm not sure who they are. I better be cautious. And then they learn them. And as you say, your father taught you, Linda, these things, a magnificent lesson, because you had to be taught not to be afraid of strangers and differences and what you can do. And that is a powerful lesson. So I say, you don't have to be taught to hate. You also have to be taught to love.
Yeah, and that
Lord,
I would
just,
say that was the key. I was taught to love
yeah.
more than anything else. I want to read something that she wrote, and I didn't know this. This is relative to the 1619 project.
Huh.
Late August of 1619, in Point Comfort, Virginia, a letter has been discovered by an early settler, John Rolfe, Rolfe. He was the oldest, it's the oldest surviving reference to Africans in the English colonies in America, and it mentions them as merchandise.
Oh, wow. Mm.
Deep in the bowels of the walls of this house we live in called America are hidden biases, hidden tenets, hidden beliefs that have been promulgated in different ways. And I think our task now, beginning in the 21st century, is to start to break those ropes, one person at a time, entertaining conversation with somebody who's not like you.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in a group, I'm Black, I'm sitting in a group predominantly white. Why? Because I believe I have a voice. And I believe that if you begin to know who I am, you at least know me. No particular group is monolithic, though. So you begin to know me. And I think that there's a military term that a soldier can't shoot a person a combatant he's met and knows by name.
Never heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's a common practice in all military traditions that you belittle the people that are your enemies and
Oh,
refer
yeah.
to them as non-human.
Yeah.
And I think that ties right into that reluctance of people to shoot someone that they know.
right.
Yeah.
Well, you asked earlier about what can be done to change the way things are.
Yeah.
And to me, it's basic. You'd have to teach people to think critically. If people thought instead of just accepting a belief that is laid on them, then it would help. But there's very little critical thinking going on anymore.
And how do we do that?
Well,
How do
in
we,
school,
how do
I
we do
suppose,
that?
when everything is so automated that people don't learn to think anymore. It never occurred to me that you had to be taught to think. Until I was 5, I was around adults who thought. And so thinking was second nature to me. I still think, and I don't, and when I think, I get very upset with the people who don't, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a problem with a whole lot of stuff. I mean, from the government on down, it's all me, 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 me. No one thinks of what's good for everyone. How to make, to be strong, but be sensible.
Yeah.
Blind belief is our enemy.
Right. Yeah. And
Mhm.
the point I made is we are just one person. And yes, we vote and we have voting campaigns and we support candidates and the whole shooting match. But it begins in our homes with us. And I have conversations with my grandchildren in an attempt to get them to begin to think critically because the schools don't teach.
Mhm.
And they're involved with their phones all the time, and the phone is processing, the computer is processing. They don't know the process,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? So there are certain games and things we're engaged in and conversations we get engaged in that I think helps promote critical thinking.
Mhm.
We don't have to try to drink the whole glass of Kool-Aid, just a sip at a time.
Yeah, I sometimes ask people when they are, this is, I read, and I said, and what is the source of that information? And very often, I'll never forget the first time somebody said, I read it on Facebook. said Facebook is
Yeah.
not a source.
Well,
Facebook is an opinion platform.
well, there
So what
is,
you need
however,
to do is to
yeah, yeah.
take that thing that you are embracing and deconstruct it into its elements and prove or disprove.
Right. Yeah.
And they did not ever talk to me again about
Or
Well,
you
if I may,
planted a seed.
it. I hope.
critical thinking is definitely important. Certainly, deliberate study, I think, is very important, and that's a part of it. You analyze, you take a look. Although research about the magical thinking, I'll call it for lack of a better term, of the left and the right is about the same. The same proportion of people believe nonsense on the left, say our side, if you will, progressives or whatever you want to call us, as on the conservatives. And I'm looking at those conservative Supreme Court justices that Trump appointed with their biases, and I realize each of them is a highly intelligent, highly educated person from top schools sitting there in judgment. They know a whole lot more about the law than I ever will, and their opinions may be different from mine. So I'm not so sure being smart or thinking is the whole story. But I have a couple of things. If you want to know what I think we can do, I've been thinking about it. I've got some quotes from people that lay out 3 parts, if you'd like.
Take a shot.
Here's okay.
Yeah.
It starts with, you remember the serenity prayer? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, and the the
And the
courage
wisdom
to
to know
change
the
the ones I
difference.
can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, there's a variant on the theme from, there's something called proactive 12 steps. It's a 12-step, and it says, through trial and error, I will learn the serenity and the wisdom, and the serenity and the courage and the wisdom. Okay. So the 3 quotes that I've sort of lived by, not live very imperfectly. Let me tell you right off the bat, I have no qualms about saying I'm not practicing very well, but they're part of dealing with what can we do to change and how do we deal with differences in people on whatever level. The first one is from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand and then be understood. That's the first. Make sure you really understood it and make sure you're talking clearly. The second is a quote by, you don't have to write them, I'll send them out. I've got them listed on a piece of paper. The second is by Maya Angelou. And she says, I may forget what you said, I may forget what you do, but I'll never forget how you made me feel. Emotions are hugely important, not to be trivialized. Just because you're upset and emotional, that's part of who you are. And the final one is a quote from, well, it's a group of people in Australia, Aborigines. Lila Watson is one of them, and she gets credit, but she has said, no, it's the group, is talking to social workers or missionaries or whoever. And if she coming to help, and she says, if you've come to help us, you're wasting your time, or you're wasting our time, whatever, you're wasting it. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let's talk. And those 3, understanding, dealing with feelings, and recognizing your mutual liberation, are the key to making the actions necessary to make the difference. That's my way.
Right. And those are all beautiful and lofty, and I'm going to nail it.
Yeah.
How do we make each one actionable?
Yep. That's it.
You
got
understand what I'm saying? Personally,
Yeah.
how do we make each one of those actionable?
Mhm.
And that's the challenge. And that may be the challenge for all of us in the 1619 project as we go forward. I want to share something with you. I wrote this March the 2nd, and then I called Dick. 53 pages into the book. I'll not wait to complete cast, but share its impact on me progressively with you. Today, I'm 53 pages in. The progress is slow by my journaling notes. Today, as green buds peek from the branches in my backyard, I'm dumbstruck by the final sentence on page 53. Quote, none of us is ourselves. And my soul cries out, then who am I really, and who are you? Since race and color casting are social constructs conceived in America, and we are neither black nor white, how and where do we find our human?
Oops.
That was the earthquake moment for me.
You say page 53?
None of us are ourselves.
That's the last. But the first part isn't there for some reason. I'm sure you read
No,
it, but
it
I'm not
was
sure.
my
I'll take
right. Yeah,
yeah.
it
I had
it,
the hardback version. Yes.
yeah. It was
That's true.
part of what I was journaling, and I quoted her in my journaling. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Then none of us are ourselves. That was a quote from her. Yeah.
So if none of us are ourselves, who are we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're a
Neither.
collection of the people we've met.
Ah, I like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a big genetic component as well.
Yeah.
I've
But
phrased
I
it a
wonder
different way.
sometimes, like, would I have different attitudes if I lived in Mississippi, say, instead of Southern California? I worry about that because I suspect I would.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. We're kind of a collection. We're very dominated by our community because we're very social animals.
Yeah, that's true, except that my first husband was an exception to the rule. He grew up in Atlanta in a socially prominent family. He had one brother who was older, and his older brother talked about niggers and Jew boys and made jokes about them. But my husband, on the other hand, went to Harvard Business School, became an executive of Xerox, and when he retired, he had a company, venture capital company, where he made loans to people of color to start businesses. We always had Black friends, but there were some misunderstanding with the Black friends sometimes about some comment they misunderstood because of Black paranoia. You know, it was a balancing act, but we always had friends from other ethnicities. I've counted up once, and we've had people in our family so far from 12 different ethnicities. So that there are exceptions to the rule in the South, I'm happy to say.
I'm sort of taken aback by the categorization of people who had misunderstanding as Black paranoia.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Apparently what it was, because things were said that had no intent, that were taken as having some negative intent. And it's really hard to talk your way out of something like that when someone has misperceived.
But is that paranoia or just a misperception? There's a big difference.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
all right. I accept that.
yeah, there's a big difference
That is a
between
term
that.
that has been
Yeah.
used.
There's something. May
Even
I
today,
interject? Go ahead. Go ahead.
even today, I'm a doctor, and even today, I've had things said to me that were insulting and degrading, but I'm not paranoid.
Yeah.
I take offense, but I'm not paranoid. And I get it straight because I know I have a voice.
That's a good
And
point.
through conversation, that other person might be able to understand how what they said might be reframed in the future, speaking with another person of color.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of like how I've learned to do that as I've gotten older. When I was younger and I cut my hair and had an afro and wore dashiki, white power,
Right.
power, and I joined the revolution. It was totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different. Okay.
Different
So
world.
yeah,
I like history a lot.
yeah.
And so I really like the Black Power movement because at that time, I don't think, oh, I know our history courses aren't very good anyway, And they just lightly skipped over Africa completely, over the civilizations of Africa, the cultural input to
Mhm.
America.
Yeah.
The whole reason why Africans were imported to do the labor, as opposed to, well, we'd kill the Indians and we couldn't do the labor
Right.
because, well, we don't actually know why we couldn't do the labor. It was too darned hard. But mainly, I love that power movement
Mhm.
because we were wasting a resource.
Yes.
But there's so much that we still don't know. Like I just discovered recently, like I see that the whole GI Bill after World War II kind of recreated our middle class,
Mhm.
leveled the playing field.
Middle class.
So many people went to college who wouldn't have otherwise. Then I discovered it wasn't open to Black troops.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
that amazing?
No.
That's huge, and we don't learn that.
Well, those are the things hidden in the walls.
Yeah.
But Rick and I
Yeah,
were
hidden in
talking,
the-
and I love that analogy of their cracks, huge cracks in the sheetrock. You don't repair the
Yeah,
crack, you just
yeah.
put wallpaper on it
Yeah.
to hide
Oh,
it.
yeah.
But there's some dangers in all of this ignorance or not being mindful. And this rocked my world too. She makes a statement that Germans underestimated Hitler and his cunningness and his support base.
Oh, yeah.
She
Yep.
pointed out some similarities. If you'll give me a minute, I'll read some. Hitler and Trump, both were outside agitators. Both were cult figures. Both enamored pageantry. Both loved parades. Both expressed the grievances and fears of the rurals. Both felt they were the God-given savior. Neither ever held elective office previously. Their goal was to exploit the methods of democracy to destroy democracy. That's in her book.
Mhm.
So the whole caste system has been a big Band-Aid, a big bandage over a lot of the problems that we face because of what we've talked about is the underlying fear factor. Isn't there a show, Fear Factor? Or there was.
Makes sense.
You're right.
Yeah, Fear Factor. Some people are really scared in this country, and they need not be.
I
I'll
think
say
we
s-
began getting scared with 9/11. I think that was so inconceivable that we could be attacked that I never had a really gut level reaction to that because I always sort of wondered when we'd be hit by terrorists in a big way.
Mm.
But I mean, you guys probably saw on the 210 freeway cars bombing down the freeway with all these flags on either side. Like,
Mhm.
you know, it's over. It happened. We were attacked. And now we're going to hit back. And we hit back the wrong people. And I think we lost our nerve then. We realized that we're just as vulnerable as everybody else. And we've become frightened
Mm.
of the future.
And when you become frightened, you circle the wagons.
But
Right.
that's an external threat. And yes, there are external threats, but there aren't that many people who are going to attack a country as big and as powerful as the United States. What I worry about is the internal threat. It's just terrifying to me what's happening in the country. It really just gets me to the core, because what I was raised to believe when I was a child is not true. And I've learned that over the years through education and moving around and experiencing different kinds of people and living practically on the Navajo reservation for 30 years. You know, I just have a different point of view from a lot of Americans, and they don't understand the advantages of assimilating people who are not just white Americans. there's a huge advantage.
Well, I think, yeah, there are, I agree, but that's an attitude, you know. We have, another thing I've been thinking about, I've been thinking about this a lot, sort of thing. One of the things is a base model of the world. And here's where you start with. Start with reality, okay? If you start looking at reality and everything around you at this very moment that is real, you think it's real anyhow, but perceptually, it's overwhelming. You can't deal with everything around you. It's real. So the first thing you do is you select what to attend your attention to, right?
Mhm.
Then once you've done that, you got to make sense of it. So the second thing you have to do is tell yourself a story about that reality that makes sense to you so you can function. Otherwise, you go nuts. So you select and you interpret. And so when we look at some situation, like a political situation, some things, there's a lot of facts involved. As a doctor, if you're in there and you're dealing with, say, I don't know what, a gallbladder operation, there's several facts. You know where the gallbladder is, you know what to do with the incision. A lot of things you make good knowledge, and the feedback is pretty immediate. If you goof, you know it right away. And if you make it right. But there are a lot of things where the facts are kind of hazy and you don't know right away. 10 years, did the first grade teacher make a difference in college? You don't know, really. So you make up stories about it. You have to do that to function. The stories, I think most of what I deal with in the world is what I select in reality and the stories I accept about that reality. So it's, you talk about how you change, operationalize it. I can't change reality, but I can change the story. I can talk to somebody. I mean, did I really hear that right? Oh, I didn't realize that. These people were property? I never heard that. That makes a difference in the story. I changed my story. And I meet somebody who's black. You know, oh, black people stink, don't they? Well, no, this person's not stinking. God darn. And you're willing to change your story and willing to say, I'll be darned. And then this is great. This person, I like chess, they like chess, they're interested in this, I'm interested in this. We build a bond that we didn't have before. And that's changing the story for me is one of the ways we make a difference and having the courage and wisdom to do it.
I think Will is getting to something here. I'd like to comment on, the reality that we all live in is a construct in our minds, of our minds taking the sensory experience that we have and translating it into a view of the world. And the way I've looked at it, particularly after reading Cast, is that all of our sensory experience passes through this window, this refraction of the caste system, which is embedded in our minds. And it's that refraction that shapes how we interpret our sensory experiences to construct the world that we actually live in our minds. And that's the insidious nature of the whole thing. But I want to add one other thing. Somebody mentioned the GI Bill and learning that it wasn't made available to blacks. Okay, that was a deliberate action. Okay, and the suppression of that information is also very deliberate, and that's one of the realizations that has come to me by being involved in 1619 and looking at more and more stories of what's going on, is how it's been a deliberate policy throughout all of our history to suppress all of this knowledge of discrimination and the impact it's had on people and the hurt and pain that it's caused. There's a deliberate effort to suppress that, and it's been part of an ongoing effort for all of our lives. And that deliberate nature of it, I found unsettling to learn about and to begin to understand. It's not just that things are overlooked and not reported. The information about what's going on is deliberately suppressed in order to shape our understanding of the world.
And now it's all about disinformation, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Information.
Right.
Just adding on to the complexities of this problem.
exactly. And all of the social platforms where people say that they have the right to have a voice. But again, it takes discernment, a certain amount of intellect, not being, and I don't necessarily mean, by that I mean wisdom, to set aside things that just don't seem realistic and dive deeper. And Susan, your point about we're the result of our surroundings, where we've come from and where we've sat. Is so true. I do still believe that if we can reach, I'm going to use a political term, reach across the aisle,
Mhm.
we would see humanity, we could see ourselves as humans and deal with what is being uncovered that was suppressed. And her book is chock full of things I never knew. It's not only the GI Bill, but it's also, I think, the housing HUD. There are lots of government programs that Blacks were eliminated from or not allowed to participate in. They gave the rest of the society a boot up, a leg up. So, any other comments? This is good. Yeah.
Pasadena is a good example of the controlling of where
Oh, yeah.
Blacks live and what they can buy. It's really, there's lots of history now that's told a lot. And I think, Dick, you've had some programs on that, right?
With
Yes.
Brian.
Yeah.
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 It's-
We've had discussions.
Yeah. It's
Oh, yeah. My
absolutely
story of,
how Pasadena did it.
Mhm.
well,
Well, just,
I remember
just the
driving a real estate
information
agent.
about the Department of Transportation and how the interstate transportation system
Yeah.
deliberately manipulated
Yep.
to create areas of poverty, to take away things. One of our speakers, I believe she was from Friendship Baptist. She talked about the area that's now the 710 stub that's been returned, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it. And I remember vividly her saying to us, I want you to understand, these were not shacks.
Yeah.
These were homes. These
Yeah.
were homes with chandeliers and beautiful gardens. And I want you to understand what was destroyed and
Oh,
why.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was that's true. In Pasadena, Portland has a similar thing. I-5 goes through a part of Portland that used to be called Albina, which was the black people. I love the name Albina, where black people live. That sort of was nice. But anyway, it's Albina with an A, not an O. And this same story, a well-established neighborhood with large homes was bulldozed first for the freeway and then to build a hospital. Emmanuel Hospital also, they took down some people. And there is a move now to reconstruct the society. The hard part is that was a black neighborhood because it was built as a segregated neighborhood with redlining and other things. It was deliberately race, and now we're having to reconstruct Jim Crow in order to stop it. It's kind of a problem.
Irony.
I have a term. I instead of Jim Crow, it's something I call James Raven. I think I've mentioned that before. And James Raven is the kind of things where you're not deliberately or not consciously, let's say, maybe you're deliberately doing something that has a disproportionate effect on the group of people, but it does in fact have it, and you will justify your actions in some other terms, such as, oh, this was a neighborhood where it was easier to build a freeway, or this was the place where this particular category of worker doesn't qualify for this benefits, or this soldiers, people who, for instance, loaded ammunition ships were not combat soldiers, so they didn't get the GI Bill, and people who went out recognizing, of course, race underlay those discriminations. So it's a kind of, wait a minute, I'm not a racist. I'm not doing that. That drives people up the wall because, wait a minute, it's not you as a person, it's the behavior that happened because of what you did.
Well,
And that's where you look behind the scene and say, this is what really happened. And it may be deliberate.
yeah,
It doesn't always have to be.
I would argue that it's more deliberate more times than not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
And
probably
that-
it. There's a lot of denial about how deliberate it was.
Right. And
Absolutely.
there are neighborhoods and groups of people who are shut out of protesting and having conversations in city government and city councils. Or
And
as happened in Houston, I remember being involved in a call of a city meeting concerning some new buildings some new housing that was going to be built. It happened in the middle of the day. The people who were going to be impacted were working.
Oh,
They
yeah.
couldn't.
Oh, yeah.
They
Oh, yeah.
couldn't.
That happens a
All
lot.
they have to do is hold the meeting. So my point is, there's still a deliberateness about it, And her book, I do believe, answers a lot of things. She says the caste system thrives on dissension and inequality, envy,
Mhm.
and false rivalry. The caste
Yeah.
system and our economic system reinforce each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
True.
another book called Poverty by America, which people might be interested in, which examines, it looks very closely at the economic system and how it's constructed and how it contributes to the same sort of discrimination that the caste system does. And it basically says it's a deliberate construct in the economy because certain groups are on top and others are on bottom, and the people on top maintain the economic system in order to maintain that privileged position.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting little, and it's not a very big book. You could read it very quickly.
Yeah. And she quotes, I'll end with this, and it's not to rile anybody. I'll quote her. How much would you have to be paid to live the next 50 years as a Black person in America?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A good point.
Yeah.
Mm.
Linda, would you send all those questions you asked us in
Oh,
in an email to us or something?
where are we? Oh, yeah. I'll
Yeah,
be
but
happy.
there were two
I'll
sets.
send
There
it
was
to
the first
Dick. Which one?
send it to Dick.
Yeah.
All the questions. Just the first set when you then the one you started out, the ones you started out with, and that final question.
Okay. All right. So we've got some work to do.
Yeah, well, I will,
Mhm.
because otherwise I will suppress these things. That's the other thing. Recognizing in ourselves, and not myself, I recognize how much I will put a bias on something that isn't deliberate necessarily, but it was, wait a minute, I don't want to deal with that right now, so I'll just forget it happened.
Right.
And so it helps to have something up in front of the face to say,
Right.
oh, yeah.
And we all do that. And
Yeah.
we really do. I have a lot of contact with young Black youth, and there's no way in the world they can see a conversation with anyone who's not Black.
Really.
Mhm. Interesting.
You know, I coordinate a writers group for the Pasadena Senior Center. And I really enjoy the Senior Center things because we have a mix. And there are, let's see, in my writers, it's small right now because we've had some illness and so on, but there are 4 Black people, 2 white women, a white man, and an Asian man. And so we get different points of view, and we appreciate what each other writes. And the difference in color simply doesn't matter. We're all writers. We all have a message. And we have become fast friends. We're like a family.
And that's the intersectionality that we can
Yeah.
attempt to attain, one person at a time.
Yes.
Just one person at a time. So
Well,
the next time you're on and I did this on an airplane. I can't believe I had the guts to do this. I was sitting between 2 couples. A couple was sitting next to me, and they were dressed in total ideology of Christianity and Trump. I'm serious. Young couple. And I don't know, for some crazy reason, I said, well, I'm just going to find out all about them. And we engaged in a conversation. And yeah, they said some things that were a little, I thought were putting, but it didn't bother me. And that was their ideology. And then they wanted to know a little bit about me. I'm totally different. And the husband said, that's amazing. I don't think he ever had a conversation for an hour and a half with anybody Black before. And it was just eye-opening. And
Yes.
taking the risk to just
Yeah.
sit down with somebody who's a total
Yes.
stranger. If they don't want to talk, find somebody else. Just sit down with someone and get to know who they are. And we found commonalities. He was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
I had a similar, very funny experience, but not. It was I volunteered at a local history museum, and this couple came into our exhibit, which was on quilts, and they were thrilled and yada yada yada. And it turns out they were from Kansas, and the man came up to me and said, "You know, this was so unexpected." I thought, an exhibit on quilts is unexpected. And he said, "I didn't know you people out here in California knew anything about this stuff."
Oh,
He said, "I didn't want to come here.
oh,
This visit has been great. You're not weird."
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, we are.
Oh, I
I
must
didn't
say,
say,
they didn't see
"Wow,
the whole
that's
story,
because you
did they?
haven't gone down to a certain street I know." But
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 tell me, he needs to come to Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know you knew about these things. I wanted to say it's a quilt show.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. In the simplest of places, and just
Well, and when he said, "I didn't want to come here, I didn't want to come to California, a wife made me," I thought, isn't that an Archie Bunker statement?
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, we're so glad you did."
Yeah.
there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah. Well, this has been more than a pleasure. I had, I
Yeah,
think
that's great.
Dick kind of said, "Well, Linda, why don't you do this?" And I kind of went, "What?
Eh,
Me?"
No.
I hope we continue growing. And the
Oh, yeah.
1619 Project Lingering Impact is who we are now. And it's the 21st century. And it's time to take action.
Yeah.
nicely said.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks for having.
I saw a quote that I liked. I like quotes. And this, I think, was by Edmund Burke. And he said the worst mistake a man ever made was to do nothing because he could do so little.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. And, you know, what
Yeah.
we're trying to do with the 1619 is encourage discussion and get people to know and understand each other, to see things that you don't see, because a lot of people don't have the experience. I mean, there have been several allusions to it in this discussion so far about people of one group having no knowledge of people in another group and fearing them because of it. And
Yeah.
so the idea of getting to know people getting to know things about people that you can relate to, I think is a good starting point for making a change. And you could think about everything we're doing as planting seeds of flowers in a field. And, you know, you can plant a seed here and you could plant a seed there, and it takes a lot of seeds before the color of the field changes. But each little seed makes a difference, and that's all we can do is plant the few seeds that we can.
Well,
And
Exactly.
I suspect
Yeah.
that couple that you talked to on the airplane, I suspect that they have a different attitude from what they would have had if you hadn't spoken to them, and they'll carry that with them, and we don't know how it will manifest itself in their lives, but there's something in there that they didn't have before, and I think that's the kind of thing that you can think of as a positive change.
Well,
You know,
if I may,
I have
if I may, the story about how much they changed because of the conversation has a parallel story to how much you changed because of the conversation.
Yes.
Because it's a mutual
Yeah.
liberation. It's not just them
Yeah.
changing.
that's right.
Yeah.
You
Who
know,
else
as
was
Because I
trying
don't
to
know,
speak? Yeah. Who else was trying to speak when Will was
Sally.
talking? Sally.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Sally.
as far as what you can do, even though it's small, hook up with a group and write cards to basically minority areas to get people out to vote. I did it when I was living in Glendale, and I'm doing it here. We're already starting to send cards to people who will support about people who will support abortion rights and those kinds of things. You can make a difference. It's small. It doesn't take any time at all. You write a note. I do 5 a day, and it doesn't take 15 minutes to write 5 notes and address 5 cards.
Well, we have an active group
There's
within
something I
Pasadena
can-
Village where we're doing that, and we have a group right now, and our current postcards that we're sending out are going to North Carolina. So if anybody's interested in that, get in touch with me, and I can put you on the list because we're acquiring the postcards and the material and the material that needs to be written and the names and addresses of people in the targeted area. And so we've got a group going like that right now in Pasadena Village.
Right.
Well, I would like to hold on. I mean, that's a fine thing, getting people, because it turns out that, again, talking race and politics is that if everybody was white who voted, the Republicans would be in total control. That the Democratic Party needs people of color, voters, to succeed. The converse of that is, I'm not sure just because it's a Democratic Party, it is the best choice for a person of color. And the hidden bigotry that's underlies, or the hidden bigotry, whatever you want to cast, and other things, is a blindness to my own biases and my own areas where I wasn't doing it right. And having the courage, when you said, Linda, you had the guts to do it, you don't know why, that is powerful. You did it. You did it. And I expect there were times when you were training to be a doctor, there were times you had to have the guts to keep, literally had to have the guts to do it on some cadaver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I encourage you, if you haven't done anything like that, to be discerning and give it a shot. If
Yeah.
if the first time is as nice as mine was, you'll have guts to do it over and over and over. So now I really look forward to getting on an airplane because I have somebody next to me that's captive, and I'm learning funny things to start conversations and things like that. So, or sitting and waiting in the terminal. I literally
Yeah.
sat next to people who aren't like me, and start a conversation.
Oh, cool.
Why
Yeah.
not? Why not?
Why not?
Plant
Bill,
seeds.
I'd like to address your last comment about the two parties. And I agree to some extent. However, of the two evils that we have, I feel that the Democratic Party is the best one for people of my ethnicity, because of the different programs that they will put forth for us. I don't want to put that message in the mainstream in an election year, because when people say, well, the Democratic Party isn't that good, the Republican Party isn't that good, maybe I should do an independent, then you're diluting vote. And if you're diluting vote, or you are allowing the really awful Republicans to get into power because you're not going out to vote. So
absolutely.
you're not being
Absolutely. I agree
heard.
with you. No, politically, I agree with you. I did a similar thing that Sally was talking about when I think I told you the story, but very briefly, there was a race for mayor of LA, Tom Bradley against Sam Yorty. And Bradley was black and Yorty was white, and it was a fairly racist campaign. And they had a complex sort of a registration system. So I became a deputy registrar. You have to be totally nonpartisan. And I registered people in Watts and all the different South Central LA sort of thing. Totally neutral. I'll register anybody who was there. And I was counting, obviously, on a race vote to make a difference. You absolutely, power politics, make it real. If you're going to have to, who are you going to live with? Choose the less of the two, and then get on their case for being evil.
It's interesting. I had someone say this to me because they're talking about age and memory loss and all this kind of thing between the two candidates running. And I have to continue to remember that what the Germans didn't pay attention to. I'd rather have, a friend of mine said, Linda, I'd rather have Biden in diapers and in a wheelchair. And I don't think our young people understand the difference between the two people. So, we have to look we have to look to what is going to be best for the common good. And I
Yes.
say that in a broad way, I
Oh,
said
yeah.
broad way. Yeah.
So I
So
have,
Absolutely. And
we can be the elephant that learns that little rope we can snap and break free out of the camp.
so I have a question for you. I was listening yesterday and they were talking about recruiting voters for the jury for the trial that's going on about
Oh, yeah.
Trump. And one of the things that they said was they were looking for Black men of a certain age, young Black men, because they felt like young Black men are going to vote for Mr. Trump and they would be good to have on the jury because you just have to have one person that doesn't agree. And I didn't know the background of that.
I'm not sure of what the background is. I do know several Black men in their 40s who are definitely pro-Trump. I believe it's a reflection of what she mentions in Caste, and that is a semblance accepting a narcissistic leader who identifies with your position verbally,
Mhm.
and that's
Yep.
all.
Okay.
He is a snake oil salesman.
Mhm.
Oh, he is. He is mendacious as all get out.
And so there are people who believe he is pro them when actually he's narcissistic.
Oh, yeah.
It's very, very.
So,
He's pro
I
Trump.
was
Yeah.
surprised to hear that.
Well,
yeah.
I think that they're looking for young Black men because they have in the pro-Trump camp have in their brains that those are the most malleable minds because they have the flash and so forth that he has. Consequently, he thinks that they're only capable of sports and music
Entertainment.
and entertainment, and therefore the sneaker thing when he was deciding that okay, he's going to put these sneakers out because these young Black men, they pay a couple $100, $300 for sneakers, even though they don't have a place to stay. They'll be riding around in a car, and that is what he thinks is the majority of the young Black male population, which is totally untrue. Totally untrue.
Good, good.
And they can identify. Here's somebody who eats hamburgers.
Who was?
Eats hamburgers.
This is true.
I can identify with that. He eats hamburgers. He's like me. They don't even think that he's taking their campaign donations and paying his legal bills.
Yeah, paying lawyers.
Right. So, the sneaker was just amazing. But the Bible was even better.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the Bible. That was good. Put the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and Declaration of
and Lee
Independence.
Greenwood song lyrics. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Sell it for, what was it, $59.99? Right, Cheer?
$59.99.
So,
Today only. You get two of them for $110.
$59.99.
How many I've got here? You want one? You want one?
yeah.
Oh my golly.
So we can counteract this one at a time and just it can have multiple effects long run. I'm convinced.
Good.
Well,
I like that.
the caution is not to demonize Trump and the people who vote for Trump, because they have their reasons. We have our reasons for doing different things. And if you demonize them and exclude them and ostracize them, you've lost them.
You give them more of a reason to join together in a group.
Yeah.
That's called a cult.
Yeah. And they're being cultified. But the point of the whole thing, it all goes back to the preponderance of people who support Trump in the middle of the country are not highly educated people. Therefore, we're back to the thing of critical thinking again.
Well, they're middle class.
They're easily programmed because they don't think for themselves. They take what's on the tube or what they
But-
see on their phone or whatever as gospel truth. When
Sally,
they're
I'm going
they,
to I'm going to
they
give
don't
you a reason.
process.
There's a reason for that. The average grade level, reading level in the United States is what?
Fourth grade, I think.
Right. That's not their fault.
6th grade.
But
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
that's not their fault. So we have work to do locally because the local governments and things control the education system. How do we know? Because Texas is, is a mess and HISD has taken over. So we have work to do. And most of the middle class is disappearing, and there's a great fear of their comfort level. That's all.
Yep.
They're just trying to survive. I
Yeah.
can't blame them for not critically thinking.
Yeah.
It's part
Yeah,
of our
man.
failure, and it's been intentional.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's not forget that the governor of Florida, De Los Santos, and Tom Cotton from Arkansas, and Ted Cruz from Texas, and John Kennedy from Louisiana are all highly educated people.
Right.
Yeah.
Harvard.
That's stupid.
Yes, they're Harvard and Oxford and Princeton and Yale. These are
And
very
you talk,
highly
yeah,
educated people,
yeah,
and
they
boy,
sure
are
are.
they terrible.
They like
Yeah.
to
Back to Jerry.
But they're engineering, this lack of
Yes,
education,
yes.
taking away education.
Let's
But they
put it
are
this way,
the money talks in group. And so, Sally, to your point, they're not necessarily middle of the country people who are supporters of Trump. They are
Yeah.
all over the country
Mhm.
who are
Yeah.
supporters of Trump. And they are also, as
Well,
you've just been discussing, people who have been educated, people who have access to the internet and to all of the things that the United States has gotten that has put us in the place that we are. And so the middle of the country, the farmers and those people, they don't have broadband access. They're not going to listen to these kinds of conversations, and they are not going to be educated even on that kind of daily basis,
No.
much less in the classroom.
Right. And there's
Yeah.
a quote from Last Place Anxiety, a book by J. Lauren Mattery. The caste system shapeshifts and protects its beneficiaries,
Yeah.
creating laws, moving boundaries, bringing down Roe v. Wade. I just added that. But the stigmatized stratify their own. The stigmatized stratify their own because no one wants to be last.
The bottom.
Yeah.
I guess intelligence has nothing to do with this. No one
No.
wants to be last.
Yeah. A lot of anxiety. And how do you act when you're scared versus how do you act when you're feeling comfortable or confident?
Or
Yeah.
there's
That's
there's nothing that's going to happen to you as a result of doing something.
Right.
There won't be a consequence.
So let's get at it.
That's right. Let's go down there.
The next meeting, I want to hear one story of who you talked to that you didn't know and what you gained, because you don't know what they gained, but what you gained from the conversation.
Yeah.
Excellent challenge, Linda. Excellent.
Good challenge.
I'm talking to a lot of people I don't know because I'm responsible for interviewing people here for a little newsletter we're getting about residents. So I am the interviewer, and I get to talk to people with whom I have nothing in common, and it's fascinating.
What do you learn? Like, share that with us sometime about a person. Share that,
Yeah,
That'd be-
well, one guy was a mechanic for United Airlines. I learned about how they take the engines apart and clean all the parts. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it
You
would
know,
be.
and we have many Asians here. We have a bunch of Irish people. We have German people. We have Russian people. And so I get to talk to all kinds of people.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
deal.
Here's a courageous thing. First of all, I put into the chat the name Braver Angels. It's an organization to help people talk across differences across the red and blue, but that when you're in a group, a mixed group of people, finding out their perception of the group interaction is courageous. It's courageous on their part, especially if they feel they're one down, and they are reveal that they don't agree with you. What happens then? And how can you support them, and how can they support you? It's not an easy thing. Courage is I have a lot of trouble being courageous, but it's important.
I think the key to that is what Linda said earlier, that the key is to seek to understand, not to challenge.
Right. It's not an interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was that first one I said, seek to understand and then be understood. No, it's not challenge.
Right.
And you really understood.
Yes.
Right.
Look at
Well,
check
you
out
don't
Braver Angels. They've got some things. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of that group, Braver Angels. That sounded very interesting.
Yeah.
But
very
well,
good.
you necessarily don't have to be understood, because that becomes a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the challenge is to understand who you're talking to. If
Right.
you keep going
Yes.
for them understand you, you're just
Right.
going to be disruptive.
Well,
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
that quote. I'm going to make that quote because precisely it says, first seek to understand
Yes.
Right.
them.
That means
Absolutely. It's tough.
that's significant, because that means you have acknowledged who they are first.
Amen.
Acknowledge who they are first. And
Yeah.
that they have, apparently, if you're asking and seeking, they have value. They don't know
Yeah.
it. They have value to
And
share.
the first word seek means you got to, like you did, Linda, you got to walk, listen to those people and take the courage to say, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, is that right? And you
Yeah.
just segue, learn how to segue. It's kind of fun. Kind of fun. And Dick, it was on my trip to California that happened.
Oh,
Was it? Oh,
really?
yeah.
Yes. And back. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Were they Texans or Californians?
Texans.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Texans. With big entrepreneurial businesses in oil.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, California kind of runs the gamut, though. There's someone
Oh,
here
yeah.
who I believe is gay, and he left Orange County because of all the hate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
couldn't get
Yeah,
down
the
there.
coast is one thing, but you get more into like the Sierra Nevada, the Central Valley. That's a
Oh,
whole
yeah.
other
Yeah.
set of
Yep.
cities.
The country's got a lot of people that are strong supporters of their way of life, along with a few city refugees who hang out in the country and talk about things like we're talking about. It's an interesting mix.
Well, we're down to the last couple of minutes. Anybody got a closing thought they want to fire off before we go?
Say thank you, Linda. That's one.
Thank
for
you
sure.
very
Thank
much,
you,
Linda.
Linda.
I'll close with
And Jean Owens, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Haven't seen you in a long time. Glad to see you.
I'll close with what she closes her book with, the last several chapters. And I'll just close with the title of one of them. The heart is the last frontier.
Cool.
Well, I want to invite everyone to stay in touch. We've got some interesting things coming up. And by the way, May 3rd, which is the first Friday in May, we are not going to be meeting because I'm going to be in Denver where my son has a play opening the next day. And so, so we're skipping the May 1st, but we will be back on May 17th, and we'll be talking about a new series of programs that we're looking at starting here within Pasadena Village, talking about civil rights and commemorating the events of the 60s and the civil rights struggle. And that's in the planning stage, but I think we will be talking about it on the 17th of May to see where we're going to go with it. And I think we're going to have some very interesting things. Those will be presentations that are in person and will not be on the 1619 link, so because they'll be in-person presentations, so they'll be differently oriented, but they're related to what we're talking about. And so we're going to be talking about whatever evolves out of that series. And then we got some other presentations that I'm working on getting commitments for later in the month. One of them is talking about how the local church here that was integrated decided that the blacks needed their own church, and they founded another church. And now those two churches are coming back together and talking about apologies and reparations. And we're going to try to get some representatives
Wow.
because that's an ongoing discussion. And we also may have some follow up on the 710 spur because we've had some presentations on that. But these are local issues that are going on right now that are part of the residue of where we've been in the past.
Right.
So I think some of these can be very interesting. I'm hoping that we can get some commitments for people to talk about them.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
thanks very much,
it
everybody.
is-
Yeah, go ahead. Who's that, Sharon?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is the church St. Barnabas?
Yes,
Yes. Okay.
St. Barnabas is the
Hmm.
black church, right?
Also,
And so it has survived as a black church, but now they're having different conversations, and I think hearing about what they're thinking about and what they're talking about would be a very interesting presentation.
be.
So that's what we're
It will
trying
be.
to nail down.
Great.
well, I'll put my email in the chat. So why don't you just email me directly if you want questions, and I'll know what to send.
Dig It Ministries? Okay, I'll do that.
That's it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. And this presentation will be up on the web on our YouTube channel as soon as we can get it up. So look for it there, and I will send out a notice to our mailing list so you'll get something in the mail that'll tell you.
And would you please send out Linda's email address? Because I'm on a phone, I can't see it.
Okay, yeah.
Right,
We'll
yeah,
put it-
you can
we'll
share
put
it with anyone. It's great.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you
Bye.
very much, Linda. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.